Hi everyone. Thanks so much for for joining us for today's webinar. We're just going to give it a couple of extra minutes while we just wait for the webinar to fill up, and then we'll get cracking. All right, we've just passed the 100 mark, which always feels like the perfect point to press go. So without further ado, again, massive thank you everyone for taking the time on a grey Wednesday to join us for Home versus Halls and understanding the factors shaping student decisions. Firstly, just some introductions. So I would like to introduce you firstly to Beth.
Hi, I'm Beth Wiles. I'm the research manager at TSR Insight, and yeah, I've been working on this really exciting piece of research for quite a while now, and I'm really excited to share it with you. Paul?
Cheers, Beth. And yeah, I'm Paul. I'm the commercial director here at the Student Room. Um, and we'll hope to add a bit of extra flavour of what goes on the site alongside the data that will be revealed by Beth. So yeah, with that in mind, just a brief overview of what we're going to cover. So firstly, why we decided to do this research, and particularly so what students are telling us. We'll hand over to Beth to go through the home versus halls insights. We'll touch on cost of living. It's one of those things and phrases we don't use as much anymore, but it really is still there. And then we want to hear your questions, comments, and feedback. So firstly, why have we done this research? We'll go through some of these quotes, but we've seen many students on site grappling with decisions of whether to stay at home or move away, ask a question about the pros and cons to really help make that decision for them, and also the concerns among those who have already made that decision and really requiring reassurance and support. So a couple of really great quotes here, just highlighting sort of the types of conversations that go on the student room. Just going to read out one. I've applied to uni and intend on commuting because it's cheaper and works out better for me, but I'm concerned about making friends. People say that commuting makes it difficult to make friends. Is this true? Because I don't want my time at uni to be lonely. And that's a theme that comes up quite a bit. Also, the news has not been really positive when it comes to the cost of higher education, the cost of accommodation, and this also plays into the challenges and the stresses that universities are facing. So again, soaring rents may force students to turn down top university choices or live at home. Quite sensationalist right there. Student maintenance loans almost entirely used up by rent, report warns. And that is, again, another thing that comes up a lot from our cohort, particularly within certain cities. So again, what are we seeing on the site? We have a really lively student accommodation forum. It has around, in the last 60 days, 147,000 page views, 2,000 posts. It's a really sort of just important place for students to come in and talk about student accommodation in particular. But we also see comments from students and also parents across the entire site relating to accommodation, particularly around sort of the clearing period in particular. So again, two other quotes. I'm a year 13 student right now, so this is probably from August time, and I'm going to be moving out next year. When do I start looking? What's going on? Currently decide whether I should live at home when I'm doing my uni education or do accommodation. Anyone who has lived at home during uni, what could provide me with some pros, cons, and their overall experience. So yeah, you're seeing from both these kind of, both the previous slides, this real need for sort of reassurance, this understanding of this is a really big decision to make. Do I go to halls? Do I stay at home? And I need support from the community, but also I need support from universities to help make that decision. So that is why we chose to do this piece of research.
Great. Thank you. So I'll just talk a little bit about the objectives and the methodology now. So broadly, the aim of the research was to explore the decision to stay at home or move away for university and really dig into the reasons for that choice. So this is a snapshot of a much wider report, which will be available to download after the webinar. So in terms of the methodology, so we conducted an online survey with the student room community. So this was ran in the spring term last year. So, well, last academic year. So this was prospective undergraduates. So we spoke to UK students age 16 plus who were planning to start university in 2024, 2025 or beyond. And we had a great response. So 993 respondents completed the survey. And I won't go into the full participant profile here, but that's in the main report if you wanted to dig into that a little bit more. So we started firstly with the big question. So did they plan to stay at home or move away for university? And then we explored the reasoning behind their decisions. So looking at the sample, so almost a quarter of our sample, 24%, were planning to stay at home for university. And the remainder, 76%, were planning to move away for their studies. So we're going to do a quick poll now. So if you went to university, what did you do in your first year of university? Where did you live? I'll just give that a second. Great, thank you. So it's looking here. So 23% of you stayed at home, and 75% of you moved out of home to university halls or private accommodation. So really quite interestingly, quite broadly in line with our sample there. Just looks really interesting. So we looked a little further into who was staying at home for university firstly. So those planning to stay at home were more likely than those moving away to be the first in their family to go to university, so their parents or carers didn't attend, to have received free school meals. We've got sort of some regional patterns coming here. So those planning to stay at home for university were more likely to live in London or the Northeast, to live in a city, or to be interested in clinical subjects. And we asked those staying at home to describe the reasons behind their decisions in their own words. So there was 4 key themes that emerged from this question. So the top theme that came most frequently was finances and saving money. So not having to spend or not being able to spend money on rent, food or bills as they would if they moved away. So there were also a lot of responses around having the support around them. So feeling that they needed the support of their family and friends in that transition to university in case anything was to go wrong, or if they just simply didn't feel ready to move out of home yet. And we also had several responses that there was simply not a need for them to move away as there is a strong selection of universities nearby. So this possibly links back to my earlier point about those planning to stay at home being more likely to live in a city or the Greater London region, where perhaps there's a greater choice of universities within that commutable sphere. And we had a smaller number of comments about wanting to keep their existing commitments at home. For example, if they had a part-time job that they really liked and didn't want to leave. So I think from this, it's worth considering that the cost is a factor in their decision, but there are much wider influences for staying at home for university too. So moving on to now, who's moving away for university? And again, I dug further into the data here. So those planning to move away were more likely than those planning to stay at home to have had parents or carers who attended university previously, to live in the southwest or the southeast of England, to live in a village or a rural area, again, like I mentioned, a bit harder to commute, and being interested in arts and humanities subjects. So now looking at their reasons for planning to move away in their own words. So I think the main reason that came through here is respondents wanted to gain independence or responsibility. They wanted to learn to do things on their own. And they also wanted to experience new things and meet new people. So it was the experience of living in halls that was mentioned here by respondents. So for some of those planning to move away for university, it might be worth emphasising opportunities related to the broad university experience. So what can they do to get involved in wide-ranging activities and meet new people? But we also had practical considerations emerging on this side too. So for some, there simply wasn't the course that they wanted to do available locally, or that they felt that they could get into a university that they perceived to be better, further away. And we had a few mentions of students wanting to aim for perhaps Oxford or Cambridge here, or that they simply wouldn't be practical to commute, be that if it would take too long or be too expensive. So we then asked 2024 entry respondents whether their decision to stay at home or move away had been made out of necessity, made out of choice, or a combination of the two. So perhaps surprisingly, those planning to move away from home were slightly more likely to say their decision was made out of necessity than those planning to stay at home. However, for the majority of those, both moving away, 73%, and staying at home, 82%, there was an element of choice in their decision. So this was either their decision was made out of choice or it was made out of a combination of necessity and choice. So students aren't necessarily making the decision to move away or stay at home because they have to, it's because they want to. So move away out of necessity is perhaps driven by that group who can't study what they want to study locally and they can't get to their chosen course nearby. So, for example, if a student wanted to study, I don't know, joint honours in French and philosophy, then there might not be as many choices as they wanted to study something like psychology or business. And when did they make their decision about their university living arrangements? So the data for those planning to stay at home is shown in green on the left-hand side of the chart, and those planning to move away is shown in purple on the right-hand side of the chart. So the decision to stay at home or move away was generally made really early in the cycle. So for the largest proportion of respondents, it was always their plan. So 40% of those planning to stay at home and 51% of those moving away said it was always their plan. And most respondents, so 90% of each audience, had made this decision or intended to make this decision prior to submitting their UCAS application. And just 1 in 20, 2%, plan to decide whether to move away at the point of selecting their firm and insurance choices. So despite decisions generally being made early, the majority of those staying at home, so again shown in green on the left, and moving away, again shown in purple on the right, had also considered or were actively considering the alternative option. And interestingly, respondents planning to stay at home appear to be more open to moving away than those planning to move away appear to be staying at home. So 78% of those planning to stay at home for university were actively considering or had previously considered moving away for university, which is significantly higher than the 63% of those moving away for university who'd also considered or were considering staying at home. And just 22% of those planning to stay at home had only considered this option. So looking just at those moving away now, it also appears that the majority of those planning to move away would be flexible on their decision for the right course. So we asked if the perfect course was available a mile away, what would they do? And more than half, 53% of those planning to move away would instead stay at home. And then almost 3 in 10, 29%, would choose that course and move into university accommodation. And only around 1 in 5, so 19% of respondents said that they'd choose a different university further away. And what I thought was quite interesting is perhaps reflecting their later stage in the decision-making process. So a reminder, this was sort of May 2024. We did this research at the end of the last cycle. 2024 entry respondents were more likely to say they'd choose a different university further away, so 23%, than those who were applying for 2025 or beyond at 16%. Now, just looking at those planning to stay at home. So if money and personal circumstances were no object, around half of respondents planning to stay at home would have still made the same decision. So I'm going to pass back to Paul now.
Brilliant. Thanks, Beth. Just a reminder, by the way, we have a chat function and also a Q&A function as well. So if you do have any questions, please pop them in the chat. We'll be monitoring that and also sort of within the Q&A. But yeah, a lot of data there. And I think it's always useful to have a mini summary and sort of take out some key insights. So what we believe the main takeaways from that and kind of the almost so what is, firstly, people are making these decisions earlier and earlier. with around 60% of stay at home and 70% of move away students knowing what they want to do prior to year 12. And if we think about that from our university comms perspective, how much messaging is really focused on that early awareness audience, where so much of decision making is clearly taking place. Despite that, 52% of move away students would stay at home if their local university provided their ideal course. Again, with knowing that and combining it with the decision making happening at an earlier age, what is done from universities and their marketing teams to really communicate your course profile again to those earlier cohorts, to year 11s or year 12s. Much might be done on a university brand perspective, but how much on a individual course perspective to those earlier cohorts. And one which was a genuine surprise is that financial concerns is an issue, but it really isn't the only one. And that previous slide from Beth would show that if money wasn't a concern, would you make the same decision? 50% of stay-at-home students are, yes, I would absolutely make that same decision. But for those where financial concerns still is really important, if you're trying to attract students from further afield, how can you market your almost like your low-cost credentials for those who are in possibly lower cost of living areas? And the other side is bursaries. So many amazing bursaries exist. So many of them don't get filled. And often they're not communicated earlier in the decision-making journey. So how can you bring your bursaries earlier into that journey and communicate them to students? Brilliant. Beth, back to you.
Great. Thank you. So in the next section, we'll look in more detail at cost of living concerns. So this is something that we see frequently on the site in relation to their decision to stay at home or move away. And on the site, when we see cost of living issues come up, it's not just students we see commenting here. So this is an area where we get questions posed from parents too. So I'll give you a minute to read through the quotes, but I think the top left one, say, my son's applied for a degree and wants to move out as opposed to staying at home, but we live 5 miles away. Pretty expensive, our household income isn't very high, so I'm worried about the financial side of things and whether he'll be able to afford it, even with the living costs loan. I'm even considering taking out a loan to help him, which I thought was really interesting. So we get those sort of things through a lot on the site. So as we saw earlier as well, so cost of living appears to be a large factor in their decisions to move away or stay at home for university. And in our survey, we got this coming through quantitatively as well. So 90% of respondents agreed with at least one of the statements we gave them around cost of living. So these statements listed in the chart here. So for around 3/5 of respondents, so 59%, the cost of living was more of a concern to them than tuition fees. And they weren't just concerned about their own needs. So as we mentioned earlier about their parents commenting on the site. So in total, 63% selected that they were worried about the financial impact on their parents or carers, or that their parents or carers were worried about the costs. And in total, half, 50%, worried whether they could afford university. However, interestingly, less than 1 in 5 felt that choosing an area in a low cost of living area was a priority.
Yeah, that's really interesting, Beth. Just want to jump in there as well, because this is something that we see frequently in sort of lots of the research you've done, but also some of the student sentiment. And it's around that kind of budgeting requirement side of things. It's not something that's taught massively frequently within schools. And we always see, I said, like in our research and sentiment, this kind of desire to like help me budget. So one of the things that universities can do to support that more is, if you have budget calculators, talk about them. If you have pages on your site which kind of can help on things like cheap eats, how to maximize the city you're in on a budget, those things are really useful. But the other one is to be really upfront with any other costs that people need to be aware of, and it just really helps on the budgeting side of things and limiting the concerns that students face around cost of living.
Great, thank you, Paul. So those planning to move away were more likely to have cost of living concerns than those planning to stay at home. So we've broken this down in the chart there. So students planning to move away are shown in the purple bars, and students planning to stay at home are shown in the green bars. So 93% of those planning to move away felt that at least one of these areas was a concern, compared to 80% of those planning to stay at home. And specifically, we found that those moving away were more likely to feel that choosing a university in a high cost of living area concerned them. So 52% compared to 33%. And the cost of living at university concerned them more than tuition fees. So 64% compared to 44%.
This is again one of the slides Beth sort of found really fascinating, particularly the big swing in the first and fourth graphs is around 20% on each. Why do you think that is?
So I think for students planning to stay at home, I think costs such as food, bills, rent, they might already be covered or accounted for, although not in all cases, as circumstances do vary. So this might mean that cost of living is less of concern. And I suppose if they're staying at home, living costs in their local area where they're currently based, I suppose they're more of a known quantity. So it's where they live now, and they know how much things cost,
Yeah,
essentially.
yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Cheers.
So in the next section, we'll look at the support required for those planning to stay at home for university, and also what their commute is likely to look like. So 90%, 98% of those planning to stay at home felt that some information would be helpful as they transition to university. So most often the course timetable, so that's something that 75% wanted, support for students staying at home, 68%, and opportunities to meet and network with other commuter students, at 67%. So on average, each respondent selected 4.2 different options from the list we gave them, suggesting that a wide range of support is required as they begin university. And a stat that I found particularly interesting here. So in total, 69% wanted information related to transport. So that could be information about transport links, parking, park and ride, or safe bike storage. So just because they're planning to commute or potentially live locally, doesn't mean that they already have that sort of information to hand.
Yeah, this is another really interesting one, Beth. There's some obvious bits here around university comms that can support stay-at-home students, particularly around those practicalities. The two that really jumped out to me were the 68% around support for students staying at home and the 67% around opportunities to meet and network with other students. We kind of know from lots of other research that that sense of belonging is so vitally important to continuation rates and just having a really positive kind of university experience. So again, it's another one where if those tools exist, be it either elements on the website or sort of networking groups that you create through your students' union, on the student room, other online communities, if there's a way of making sure those really come to the fore to support stay-at-home students, I think that'll make a really big difference.
Great. Thank you. Now, we just mentioned transport earlier, so also looking at sort of how they expected to commute. So respondents planning to stay at home for university were most likely to plan to commute using a really wide range of methods. So we found that 84% would be reliant on public transport in some way for all or part of their journey. And commutes were expected to use multiple transport methods. So each respondent selected that their commute would include an average of 2.3 different modes of transport. So there's quite a lot of scope there for things to become a little bit tricky. So there's been some really insightful articles on this topic in One Key around the experience of commuter students. And I'd highly recommend reading some of Emma Maslin's articles from last year about her experiences of joining commuter students on their journeys to university. And this article as well really highlights how varied the experiences of commuter students are. So to quote Emma's article, train users had to contend with differing levels of cost, train frequency and journey times, with car users facing different fuel costs and traffic depending on their route to campus. This was in addition to any differences as a result of a student's individual academic timetables when they needed to be on campus and the knock-on impact this had on their commute. So we also asked about the length of commute in our survey, and 70% of respondents planning to stay at home expected that their commute time would be more than 30 minutes. And in total, 7% expected their commute time to be 90 minutes or more. And 14% were still unsure at this stage how long their commute was likely to take. So my takeaway from this is there's so much variety here. So it's worth keeping in mind that some students will have a long or complex journey, and others perhaps have a quicker or simpler journey than those who live in student accommodation. And now finally, I wanted to look at the needs of students moving away for university, so particularly in terms of their accommodation needs. So more than 3/4, 77% of those moving away felt that accommodation was important in their university choice, including 20%, 1 in 5, who felt that accommodation was very important in their decision. And just 7% felt that accommodation would be unimportant when making their choices. And what was most important to them when considering university accommodation to choose? So cost was most likely to be considered important when choosing accommodation. So this was selected as an important feature by 84% of respondents. So as Paul mentioned earlier, this is something that is very important to make clear about upfront. So Wi-Fi speed and coverage was selected by 73%, and facilities available were selected by 69%. And in total, 96%, so the big majority of respondents selected at least one factor related to the location of their accommodation. So this could be an on-campus location, a city or town location, and proximity to amenities, transport links, or nature and parks. And on average, each respondent selected an average of 8.9 different options from the list. So they were really considering a wide range of features when they were choosing their accommodation. So we then pulled through the risk factors selected by respondents at the previous question and asked them what was the most important factor in their choice as a single select question. So cost was most likely to be considered as most important. So a third, 33% selected this, followed by on-campus location selected by 13% and en-suite bathroom located by 11%. And security was 7th in the chart among all factors on the previous slide, but 4th in terms of most important factors, suggesting that among those considering this factor in their accommodation choice, it tended to be very important. And similarly, ensuite bathroom was 10th in the chart for all important features, whereas 3rd in the chart for the most important features. However, I think it's worth noting here that cost of accommodation was 3 times more likely than an ensuite to be considered the most important priority, so 33% compared to 11%, perhaps suggesting that some would actually potentially prefer that cheaper shared bathroom accommodation. And Wi-Fi speed was 2nd among all factors, but 12th among the most important factors, suggesting this was perhaps a lower priority for them. And similarly, proximity to amenities, so 9th at most versus 5th for all, and public transport links, so 10th in the list of most versus 6th in the list of all, were also lower in the list.
Yeah, this Beth had a huge swing. What do you think was kind of driving that change?
So I think some of these things, especially things like Wi-Fi, are probably hygiene factors. So things that they'd expect their accommodation provider to get right. And things they feel important, but things that they perhaps won't, they'll want to know it's there, but they won't do a lot of detailed research on it. Although I think if these things aren't right, then they're the sort of things that can cause that they can cause them to be dissatisfied if there are issues. And when asked what one word they'd use to describe their ideal university accommodation, the most common words mentioned here were comfortable, clean, and safe. So the results are shown in the word cloud here, with the larger the word, the more frequent the mention. So we had a wide range of words here, but I've only shown those that were selected, sort of written in the open box by 10 or more respondents. And it should be noted that affordability is also coming through strongly at this question. So in total, more than 1 in 10 of the open responses, so 12%, reference cost or affordability of accommodation. So this is words like cheap, affordable, good value, inexpensive, or a bargain. And some quotes from respondents here, which often reflect the balance between getting quality accommodation and getting affordable accommodation. So the bottom left quote, cheap but not awful, is particularly interesting. So I'll just give you just one moment to just read these through. So we then asked 2024 entry respondents what accommodation information they'd need before moving in. And on average, each respondent selected 5.1 different options each, suggesting a wide range of information needs, including what happens on moving day, what to bring, and practical information, such as where the supermarket is. I'll pass you back over to Paul now.
Thanks so much, Beth. So now just a little section on what your teams can do on the student room to help. I'd imagine for the vast majority of you on here, you will have an official ambassador, an advisor on the student rooms. That'd be a member of your team, be it a student or someone from the marketing team that could physically go on site and talk to students who are dealing with a variety of concerns. But I just want to show you a couple of really lovely examples of that in practice. Jumping on, Beth. Cool. So the first one here, very, very typical question. Hi, I just want to know what is better. As a student living in London already and possibly going to uni in London, is it best to live at home with parents but travel to the London uni, or go and live in student halls accommodation in a London uni? And is there pros and cons for both? Now, for those who are geographically astute, Durham is not in London. However, it's an amazing response from a brilliant ambassador. So giving detailed support to someone who is going through a challenging decision-making process, got into lots of detail, talked through their own experience, really kind of brought it to life. Now, again, this is Durham helping a student who is likely to go to a London university. But this is a question that's asked by a vast array of students and at younger and younger ages. So from a branding perspective, it's absolutely wonderful. Next slide, please. Cool. Another sort of really classic question, and this is not just this is from a progressing student, so someone moving into their second year. Quite a lot of text, but just give you a brief synopsis. Someone is looking to move into halls in their second year because they had challenges making friends in the first year. And by the time they kind of got the confidence and started making sort of friends, everyone had already sort of made their decisions to move out and, partnered up. So they were left in a bit of a quandary, genuinely worried. The phrase here, nerve-wracking, kind of jumps out. But we had an incredible response from an ambassador at Lancaster. Again, lots of information here, but to just briefly break it down, lots of detail. Despite being from other universities, supporting someone at Warwick, recognizing this is a student who needs help, but also how can I elevate the Lancaster brand? Very relatable, shares their own situation, shares their own experience, and giving lots and lots of encouragement and support, which results in the next slide, which is, just a wonderful response from the OP, the original poster. Thank you so much for your response. The end of my first year was so positive, I'm worried it will reset, but hearing about your experience has totally made me more hopeful, so thank you so much. I never thought about it being people who would have chosen to stay in halls again. I'm definitely more hopeful now that they're respectful, easy to get along with, looking low-key hoping for a nice girl or something who I can just hang out with. Thank you so much once again. Just a lovely response to a great bit of ambassadoring from Lancaster being super, super supportive. And again, you could look at that and think, what's the direct, tangible results of that? This person is already at university, but the student room is full of people making decisions and having conversations from year 11 through to postgraduate. And those will be conversations seen by thousands of other young people going through that same process and that same decision making. And it just puts Lancaster in an incredibly strong light. Next slide, please. Cool. So yeah, just a couple of key takeaways, then we'll jump into Q&A. Firstly, personalize where possible. And I'm really keen to sort of stress the where possible here. It's very easy to say about sort of take everyone on a very unique user journey, but often that just isn't practical. We only have finite teams, and particularly sort of CRM teams are often sort of stressed more than anyone else. So the dream scenario is to personalize everyone experience. But where you can't, that's acceptable, and just optimize that information. So what is the most important things? What's the Pareto basically for stay-at-home students? If you can personalize to stay at home, what's the most important thing for to move away students? And again, focus on that kind of information. Cost is still a major concern and is unlikely to go away. Possibly even more so now with obviously some of the news around tuition fees. So keep communicating your either low-cost credentials if you're in a low cost of living area, or if you're not in a low cost of living area, what you can do, be it through the institution, the students' union, or just data that you have to mitigate some of those concerns. Then student experience is really important for both audiences, but in slightly different ways, as we saw from the decision-making process for move away students. It's very much around that kind of classic, maybe university experience. But when it comes to the stay-at-home students, it's really important that they still have that networking opportunity to be able to meet other people like them and other people who are going through the same journey as them. As I said earlier, don't presume students are staying at home because they don't have a choice. It's not just about necessity. And that necessity also isn't just about cost as well. There are lots of factors going into that decision. And finally, these decisions have been made earlier and earlier. So how can you influence year 12s and even potentially younger, especially if you recruit really, really locally? People might make a decision that's purely course-based. And if they don't know at a year 12 or a year 11, something, what courses you have to offer and that you are an option for them, they may make decisions to move away. Brilliant. All right, thank you so much. And we will jump into the Q&A. Beth, I think mainly you're going to be answering these, but I'll ask you the first question. Do you do any research into whether financial incentives from universities impacted students' decision to move away or stay at home? If so, what did that research reveal?
Oh, I'm not sure about that. That's a really interesting question. And I can certainly have a look and see if we've got anything into that and come back to you. I'm not sure we've asked that, but that's definitely a really interesting topic to explore. Have you seen any sentiment on site around that, Paul?
Not necessarily on the incentive side of things, but it's something I mentioned earlier, which is around bursaries. I remember speaking at a Helloa event and speaking at a teachers conference at a university in the Northeast, and we're talking about the bursary side of things. And one of the teachers kind of got involved and said, like, why don't we know about these at an earlier stage? Because we will help fill your bursaries for you, and we know that lots of them go unfilled. So not necessarily on the financial incentives that some of us might have seen around kind of clearing, but certainly on the bursary side of things, I think it does have a big effect on students' decision making. The biggest challenge is they don't know where to find them. So they're not brought to the fore enough so that by the time they could make a more sizable impact, some of the decisions have possibly already been made. We've got another question here. Do you have any intelligence on those that chose to live in halls for first year and then live at home second or third year to have the halls experience?
This wasn't something that I covered in this particular piece of research, but I have seen on site about students originally moving away and then moving back into halls in subsequent years. As you know, things circumstances change. Have you seen anything about that, Paul?
I haven't, no, but it might be something we could do a quick poll on the site of sort of scour for some posts, but unfortunately not. The next one, though, I think we could answer. So how large the differences in the stay-at-home move away split across regions? Are there drastic differences? Or I think we're in the same ballpark. I think you mentioned that stay-at-home was heavily skewed towards the northeastern London.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
um I think when I looked at all the regions, it was just London and the northeast that were significantly higher. And then in terms of moving away, the southeast and the southwest were significantly higher, with the other regions falling somewhere in the middle there.
Yeah, brilliant. Next one is, do you know what percentage of participants were overseas? Did we capture that?
This was just UK students
Yes, UK
included in
students.
this research. So um yeah, we didn't include international students in the survey.
Cool. This question here is just wondering if you feel the university living experience, halls, for example, is now somewhat less appealing rather than it being about barriers to entry.
Hmm.
I think so. Like the sentiment seemed to come across from partly from the data, but also partly from the student comments, is that the university living experience actually seemed really quite important for those decisions to move away. So going back to kind of like some of the data points, some people have to move away from necessity, and that is also quite clear that the necessity is a bigger factor for move away students than stay at home, and that's probably driven by course factors. But in the data, but also in the comments, a lot of that related to I want that particular experience. So I think it is still a big factor. Next
Definitely.
slide. With university fees expected to go up next year, how do you think this would ideally impact the percentage of students who would want to move away from home to study, considering the cost of living is still one of the greatest issues? This is a super interesting one, and we haven't released the report yet, but there will be a report we're creating at the moment around. It's not necessarily related to homes versus halls, but more around percentage increases in tuition fees. And we asked this question actually before the announcement. So we asked our audience how their decision-making process could change based on a 5, 10, 15, or 20% increase in fees, and how many would be like, no, that's not for me, or just like, actually, like it's fine. But that report will be out in a couple of weeks, I'd imagine, and we'll get that sent around. It doesn't necessarily go into the whole side of things, but gives
Yeah.
it a wider
I
impact.
can I can split that data down as well, by whether they plan to stay at home or move away for university. So that's something we can definitely look at as well. And we're also going to look at the data regionally, and also by whether or not their parents went to university there as well.
Brilliant. This is quite an interesting one around the language used. We notice a range of terms to describe students live at home or are commuters. Do you get a sense from the research about how these terms are received or used by these students?
When I've done when I do research with students, especially the younger sort of 18-year-old cohort, I generally find that the term I get is stay at home for university, although I have had the students describe themselves as commuter students before. I suppose not all students who live at home are commuters, because some students who live at home sort of could walk to university in 5 minutes time, so it's very varied in terms of the experience. But I don't have any sort of specific research about which terms that they used. Do you have any thoughts, Paul?
No, I don't. But I think there is definite confusion, and yeah, there is definitely confusion, particularly with the stay at home. I think this they can only be commuters and stay at home used interchangeably, but it's meaning slightly different things for people doing sort of the same thing. We've got a question here about will everything be shared afterwards? Like, yeah, we'll get all the slides sent around.
And
Um,
there's a much bigger report as well with other questions, and I've done some subgroup analysis as part of that report that you can have a read of as well if that's something that you're interested in.
Cool. There's a couple more questions, but I'm going to just pick, we're kind of running out of time, so I'm going to pick two more. And what we might try and do is answer the remainder after and have those sent around. So Beth, you mentioned about home living students being more interested in clinical subjects. Is this more things such as nursing and pharmacy or more science-based subjects?
So in terms of clinical subjects, the STEM, we didn't break it down by individual subject. We kept it quite broad, but it was definitely clinical. So I think it'd be things like nursing, pharmacy, medicine. Whereas if it was like a STEM subject, would probably be in a different category there. But no, unfortunately, that's not something that I've looked at in that level of granularity.
Fair enough. And the final one, it's a really interesting question, is were there any demographic differences in those staying at home or moving away, and particularly related concerns about safety on public transport?
I didn't pull out anything around safety on public transport in this particular research, but the demographic differences of those staying at home or move away, they're detailed in a little bit more detail in the main report. So you can have a look at those there.
Cool.
Thank you.
Well, thank you all so much. Like I said, we'll get the main report sent around to you, and yeah, there'll be some further kind of quite exciting and interesting sort of reports coming your way as well. If you do have any questions about how your university or your official ambassadors, should you already have them, could get involved in the site, do reach out to your team here at the student room, and we're more than happy to help. But yeah, have a lovely rest of the day.
Thank you very much.